Okay, excellent. All right, YouTube has picked us up. Hey there, students. Tom Richey here, and we are rolling. We are ready for a little bit of AP Government Review. And tonight we're going to be focusing on foundational documents. Now, of course, if you're watching on Crowdcast, be sure to, go ahead and if you've got any questions, any specific questions that are on your mind, gosh, I got some hair just kind of hanging out there. Happens this time of year. I need a haircut. But with that, let's go ahead and ask any questions that are on your mind, any foundational documents that are going to be, I think, something that, you find especially difficult to go into. Let's go ahead and kind of think about that. Okay. So with that, I want to give a shout out to, Vicki and her class who are here, and it's great to see y'all here tonight. So with that, now remember, I will also be going live. Those of you on YouTube, I'll be going live on my YouTube channel at 8 p.m. Eastern for AP Government Review the night before the exam. Okay, so as far as that's going, want to make sure that y'all know that that's going to be happening. So as far as foundational documents, and again, if you're in Crowdcast, you can go to the Q&A and ask a question. If you are on YouTube, you can just go ahead and ask a question in the chat. Okay, so, and I'll take a look at that once in a while as well. So as far as the foundational documents are concerned, we have several of those, of course, starting with the United States Declaration of Independence. Now, this is where we get a little bit of overlap going. We're talking about the Declaration of Independence. Most of you have already had AP US history, and so there's a bit of that going on. So Lexi is asking me, what is my favorite document out of the foundational documents? I would say that my favorite of these documents, the one that I have the most fun with, is Brutus #1. I think that that is a great document really to put in conversation with the Federalist Papers. I think it kind of completes everything. And also, I'm somebody that I don't tend to generally have a high opinion of government. And I think also that there's something about the AP government course that, if you have any idealistic notions about government, I think it gets rid of those relatively quickly. It's about what government is, not what, what we think government is. Now, of course, we understand when we go into the Declaration of Independence, for example, the Declaration of Independence is a great articulation of American political values. Okay, so when we think about our values, such as natural rights, okay, you've got, life, liberty, and property, heavily influenced by John Locke. The right of revolution, these things that, and of course the social contract. The whole idea of social contract theory is that we have gotten together that a government's power comes from the people, that we live in a democratic republic, that we believe that the government's power comes from the people, and that the people control the government. Now, so that is what we see in the Declaration of Independence. And then, of course, going from there, we go into the Articles of Confederation. Now, the Articles of Confederation, and that's something else that you would have already learned about in U.S. history, that when we're looking at the Articles of Confederation, that is something that, we are thinking about in terms of federalism, and specifically strong state federalism, and a hesitance to put too much trust in a central government. Now, of course, the context being that the Americans had, as colonists, they had to deal with the British government, with this outside government, this government outside of their states, is trying to, put taxes on them without their consent, putting troops into the colonies without their consent. And so what we had, toward the end of the British colonial period was really, for all intents and purposes, a tyranny. So the Articles of Confederation, expresses the distrust of the earliest Americans in having a consolidated government. They insisted on a federal government, that these 13 states be able to manage most of their own affairs. And also note here, and this is what I like about Brutus #1, is that Brutus #1 is coming from that mindset that we need to, in the terms of we need to be suspect of anybody outside of our small community. Okay. So that's something that you see in Brutus #1 is kind of like this sort of provincialism of the Articles of Confederation. And Brutus, what I like about Brutus #1 is it can be put in conversation with any of the 4 Federalist papers that you've got to know. So when we think about the Federalist papers, for example, we're thinking about Federalist 10, 51, 70, and 78. Now, first of all, what is it that all the Federalist papers are arguing? Okay. So, on one hand, Brutus is arguing that the Constitution should not be ratified. He's arguing as an anti federalist that the Constitution should not be ratified because it's neither federal nor Republican. Now, what does it mean for a government to be federal? It means that there is a division of sovereign powers between the states and the central government. So the Articles and the Constitution both set up a federal form of government. And that means that these powers are divided. And whatever powers are not given to the federal government, they stay with the states. Now, what powers are given to the federal government, then the states cannot exercise if they have been delegated. Okay, so remember when we talk about a delegated power, those are powers that are delegated by the United States to the federal government. Reserved means those are the powers that are kept. Okay, those are the powers that are retained by the states. Now, concurrent powers, are the powers that the states and the federal government are going to exercise concurrently. An example of this would be, for example, the state militia, National Guard. Okay, that basically the South Carolina National Guard can be called up by 2 people. They can be called up by Governor Henry. I should know my own governor, right? Governor Henry McMaster of South Carolina, and of course, President Joe Biden of the United States, who incidentally, he announced his reelection campaign today. So with that, when we think about Brutus #1, that this government is not federal. He claims that the Constitution will destroy federalism. It will destroy and swallow up the powers of the states. Now, he also claims that the Constitution is not Republican. Now, what is a Republican form of government? A Republican form of government is a government that answers to the people, that the people have elections, they elect representatives, and those representatives govern on their behalf. That is what a republic is. And we live in a democratic republic, which is a republic where everyone has an equal voice in the government. So the Federalist Papers, Madison, Hamilton, and Jay, writing as Publius, their project is to persuade people that the Constitution is both federal and Republican. Okay, so as far as that is concerned, when we think about Brutus #1, where he's arguing that the Constitution is neither federal nor Republican, Brutus says that, and he's really speaking conventional wisdom here, is that Brutus says, let me just look for something specific here. Okay, let's see. Yes. Okay. So as far as this goes, Brutus is thinking, he's writing, in the spirit of classical republicanism. Now, thinking about the Roman Republic, one of the most successful republics in history. Thank you. Let's see. SpaceX, that he says I got him a 5 on Euro. And Joshy, I am, coming back. Okay. Yeah. So, and I will hopefully be back soon with, in the coming months with some brand new videos. I know I haven't been putting a lot of content on the channel lately, and mea culpa, but sometimes kind of like Hip Hughes, has just come back to YouTube, and I'm very glad to see him making videos again. So that's something that it happens. Sometimes you got to go for a little while, you got to focus on some other things in life, and then you come back. So as far as that goes, where we look at Brutus #1, okay, and he says here that, in a free republic, although the laws are derived from the consent of the people, yet the people do not declare their consent by themselves in person. Okay, so they do not declare their consent by themselves in person, but by representatives chosen by them who are supposed to know the minds of their constituents and to be possessed of integrity to declare this mind. Now, in a large extended country, it is impossible to have a representation possessing the sentiments and of integrity to declare the minds of the people without having it so numerous and unwieldy as to be subject in great measure to the inconveniency of a democratic government. I think he's getting a little snarky here, right? And so the thing is that he says that the larger a republic gets, when you think about the Romans, that they had a republic until it got so large that it could no longer exist effectively as a republic. And I think that this is something that we need to realize, that Brutus is making great points, just like Madison and Hamilton are making some great points as well. But in some cases, I think Brutus is making points that have really stood the test of time a little bit more. I think that it's safe to say that, our country has gotten so large. The United States is a distant third, but we are still the third largest country in the world. And only India and China have larger political communities than we have. And so I think that it is safe to say, in the sense that there are Americans in parts of this country who they just don't understand how people think a certain way. And when you think about the coronavirus pandemic, just all of the different things that you saw in different states and different regions, what works for one political community and makes sense doesn't make sense at all to the other. So he says that Brutus is saying that you can only really have a democratic republic in a small political community of people who know each other's minds, and the representatives that we have. This is a time really before public opinion polling, that when somebody went to the legislative session, they're not necessarily directly in touch with their constituents. So they need to know the minds of their constituents. Now, Madison responds in Federalist 10. And if you think about these, Brutus and the Federalist kind of playing something of a game of tennis or ping pong or something like that, or really any competitive game with each other, right? But, take your pick. So with that, when we're thinking about this, that Brutus says you can't have a Republican government in a large republic. Now, Madison in Federalist 10, Madison basically says, look, I've got to answer what Brutus had to say here. Okay, so Brutus said October 18th, 1787. Now, he gets started first. This is Federalist 10 is November 22nd, 1787. This is just over a month after Brutus number 1. And so with this, we want to understand that the Federalist Papers, they were the most organized of the writers, because you've got Madison and Hamilton and Jay all collaborating, and they have a plan for this whole thing. But they weren't the first to get started. They were just more organized. And so in Federalist 10, Madison is going to have to address the skepticism that people have in New York that somehow you can create this large federal republic and that it will preserve the principles of republicanism. And so what Madison says here, he says, okay, let me make the argument here. And of course, he's trying to get the Constitution to be ratified. And he says, I'm going to argue here that a large republic is actually better than a small republic, because he says here that it cuts down on factions, on the influence of factions. And when you think about this, I think that it has a lot of validity, where he says that it's very easy for a given faction to take control of a state government. So we see here, among the numerous advantages promised by a well-constructed union, none deserves to be more accurately developed than its tendency to break and control the violence of faction. So we want to note here that Federalist number 10 is concerned with two things. First of all, how do we limit the influence of factions? Because remember, our Constitution never recognizes the existence of political parties. The goal of the framers of the Constitution, they certainly did not envision the two-party system, even though I think the two-party system is a logical consequence of this. They didn't really anticipate it. So what they said, what Madison's saying is in a large republic, there are so many factions that it's much more difficult for one faction to be in control, okay? And when you see something like that, if we look at this, if we want to test Federalist 10 out, let's think in terms of the trifectas. Like if we look at states with trifectas, and a trifecta is when the governorship and both houses of the legislature are controlled by the same party. So when we're looking at this, we see here that, I mean, there are more states with trifectas than without. Okay, so we see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Nearly half the states have Republican trifectas. And then we see that Democratic trifectas also are in many states. And it's really 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Only about 14 states don't have trifectas. So when we look at states, we can see that there is one party that is clearly in control there. Now, take that though, if we look at the 2020 presidential election in South Carolina, let's think about this. Let's look at what happened here in my home state of South Carolina. So President Trump won the state in the 2020 election, but President Biden got 43% of the vote. I mean, now that's a clear win here, but what about these 43% of South Carolinians who voted Democratic? What did they get from that? So when we think about this, when you think about, okay, South Carolina, let's see the what we would look at here is South Carolina congressional districts. Okay, so let's look at South Carolina's congressional districts. Well, South Carolina has 7 congressional districts, and we see here Republican, 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 Democrat, Republican. And so, as far as that goes, which that's great. I mean, I actually knew Russell Fry when I was in my 20s or so. Haven't talked to him in a while, but it's just when you see people that you kind of casually knew and all of a sudden they're members of Congress, you think, what am I doing with my life? Okay. But yeah, Russell just got started this year. He's the congressman in the 7th district. But notice what you see here is the Republican faction controls the state, and they create this D+14 district, which makes sure that there is only 1 Democrat out of 7. Now, as far as this goes, I'm not picking on my home state here because most states do this. In fact, gerrymandering is the rule, not the exception. And most states will gerrymander, whether they're Democratic or Republican. If we look at, for example, Illinois, let's see, congressional districts, this is a work of genius, okay? And the thing is, AP government is not about whether something is right or wrong. It's about just this is what is, okay? So look at this District 13 here, where it just kind of just travels. Why are they doing that? Okay, so as far as that goes, that this District 13 just sort of goes in a line here, right? So with that, it's just, woo, there's a congressional district just cuts right through there, okay? And then this District 15, it's just like almost like a ship that is sinking or something. And then take a look at when you go into the Chicago area. Look what they've done here as far as the districts. They've created this labyrinth, okay, that this complete labyrinth here. And if we look at Illinois congressional districts, by party. Okay, so this is, if we look at a map here, what we're going to see here. Why do they do it that way? Okay, so this map now, 14 out of 17 congressional districts are in, are in Democratic hands. So note here what we see: the entire Chicago area. Now, with the suburbs and everything, are there not Republicans in the Chicago area? But they have drawn the district so that every single district in the greater Chicago area is Democratic. And so we see this gerrymandered Republican District 16, 15. So what they've done is they've created basically three deep red congressional districts, and it ensures Democratic control over the others. But again, I think it's okay, even if you think that gerrymandering is not right, to look at something like this and just admire it. Like, wow, like how did they do that? I mean, this one, wow, like look at just the artistry. It's like Michelangelo or something, you know? Wow, only a dot. All right. Well, look, okay. I'm just looking at your map, Chicago Tribune. I'm not trying to subscribe here. And so with that, yeah, that's what gerrymandering is. And again, in Republican dominated states, Republicans do it. JB Weld, I promise I'm going to have some new videos coming out pretty soon. I've been saying it for a long time, but I really am. I think JB, that you look at Hip Hughes and his stuff. You've seen Hip Hughes is actually getting started with a proper comeback. So thank you so much. I tell you, JB Weld, and a fan of Roman history. Love this guy, and he's just been supporting me for a long time on YouTube. But new content is in the works, and it's coming. Okay, so thank y'all so much. Those of y'all who have who have been supporting my channel just in general, even those of you who aren't students and stuff like that. So yeah, so that is, so why do they do it if it doesn't represent their people? Well, here's the thing, that the party system, and that's why George Washington warned us about the political party system, that the party is not about representing the people, it's about representing the party. See, there's George Washington there, who warned us against political parties. And political parties, they certainly undermine the principle of republicanism. But as far as that goes, we want to note that there are more Republicans in South Carolina than Democrats. There are more Democrats than Republicans in Illinois. And so going from there, that basically, if you look at the federal government, now, what happens here, and the Constitution is a product of the Enlightenment. The Constitution is not an ideal form of government. It is a result of many compromises. Now, let's think about this, though. So we see, if we want to defend Federalist 10, you look at gerrymandering in South Carolina, gerrymandering in Illinois, gerrymandering in every red state and every blue state that allows it. Some states don't do it, but those states end up being at something of a disadvantage. If you think about going by 50 states, this evens itself out. So, you think about it, that the framers of the Constitution, sure, people are going to, when it comes to politics, people are going to cheat. The Constitution does not presume that people are virtuous, but it just constantly cancels out. And so when we look at the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House, it is really astounding to see, especially right now, that they are very, very close in their partisan makeup, that the Republicans barely control the House. The Democrats barely control the Senate. And so when you keep that in mind, that James Madison is saying a large republic is the only way that you can get out of one group controlling things all the time. And so we see at the federal level, we see a lot of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Whereas in South Carolina, all of our statewide constitutional officers are Republicans. And it's been that way for some time. I don't know when's I think it's been, probably more than 20 years since there's been a Democrat in an elected statewide office in South Carolina. But again, that's a small republic. Now, Brutus would say, that's, the Republican majority, they understand the minds of the majority of South Carolinians. James Madison would say, well, we kind of need this compound government in order to make sure that minorities in the states are also represented. So that's something. Yes, the stream is always archived. The stream is always archived. Just remember that if it's on Crowdcast or if it's on YouTube, it is always archived. Okay, so that's always going to be the case. And Izzy, yes, I really enjoy talking about the Enlightenment. I get to talk about the Enlightenment in European history, in U.S. history, and in AP government. So again, Brutus and Madison, they are conflicted on the size of the republic. So Federalist 10 is responding to where Brutus says you can only have a small republic. Madison says, Now, then Federalist 51. Okay, so basically, Brutus argues that that this government's going to become a tyranny. Okay, that basically Brutus will say, let's see. Well, anyway, I don't know if I can find the quote right now exactly, but Brutus, in Brutus number 1, it's worth a read, okay? But Brutus is saying that there will be certain people. There will be certain people that they are going to, because they're too far away from the people, that in a large republic, they're too far away from the people. The people cannot keep an eye on them. The people cannot hold them accountable, that the government will basically become a consolidated tyranny. Yeah, so basically, Izzy, I think that, now, you can definitely put those documents in conversation, but you may not have an occasion to put the documents in conversation on an argument essay. But then again, you might. Okay, and somebody asked earlier which foundational documents are most important. Well, it depends on which foundational documents end up on the test this year, because the argument essay is going to say, here's a prompt, and here are 3 foundational documents. You got to use one of them in your argument if you want full credit. Now, the other piece of evidence can really be from anywhere, okay? The other piece of evidence can be from anywhere, but they will have, and then also there will be certain foundational documents that work better for your argument. So when Brutus says that people of bad character are going to get into the government, okay, people of bad character are going to get into the government and they're going to consolidate it. It will no longer be a republic. Now, James Madison in Federalist 51, this is where, now this, Federalist 51, I think, is probably the most important of the Federalist Papers, okay, because basically, it goes into a defense of the separation of powers and the checks and balances. Okay, so that's something. And if we say here, okay, that James Madison says, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. Okay, gonna have a little shout out to the Bill of Rights Institute here, for making these primary sources available. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. So in framing a government, which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. So if we look here, what we're going to find here is, let's see, AP Government Argument Essay. Okay, so if we look at the AP Government Argument Essay, let's see, rubric. Okay, so AP Government Argument Essay rubric here. One of the things that I want to note is a strategy that you can use, an opposing or alternate perspective. You can concede some things. So as far as that goes, where Brutus and Madison agree is that, people in the government, neither one expects politicians to be particularly honest or honorable all the time. But what Madison says is this government has sufficient checks and balances. So Federalist 51 goes into all of the checks and balances. For example, when we look at the legislative branch, Madison says that we've taken Congress, and instead of a unicameral Congress like you have under the Articles, you have a bicameral legislature. So you divide the legislative in two, and it makes it more difficult for a single faction to pass laws that are excessively friendly to it. So that's what we're seeing with Federalist 51, that he goes into these things. Now, if the legislative then passes a law that could be offensive to the people, then the president has the power to veto that legislation. And in order to override a veto, it's going to take 2/3 of each house, which is very difficult. 90% of vetoes actually end up standing. And so Madison just goes into, like, because the articles, when we look at the Articles of Confederation, there were no checks and balances. There was no separation of powers. There was no federal judiciary. But the government was safe because its powers were small and limited. So even though there was just Congress, its powers were so limited that it could not become a tyranny. Now, of course, its powers are probably too limited because we've got the government that's in charge of maintaining an army and navy, and this government that's in charge of maintaining an army and navy can't collect taxes, okay, unilaterally. And so that's probably a bit of a problem there. So with that, Madison says the separation of powers and the checks and balances. That is going to be, I mean, we know that angels do not govern men. Okay, that's what Madison has to say here. We know that angels don't govern men. That is not new information, Brutus. So, coming from there, he says that. Now, also in Federalist 51, what doesn't get a lot of attention is another argument Madison makes, is that, let's say theoretically, this system of checks and balances ends up failing at the federal level. Madison notes that you have the states. Okay, now, so as far as that, that you have the states, let's see, oppressive combinate, let's see, Extended Republic on the United States. Can't find there. This might be excerpted there is the thing. So a lot of times, different people excerpt different things, but note that in Federalist 51, he does make references to federalism. So then there is this idea of the unitary executive, okay? So we think about this, the unitary executive, that means that there is one person, a single individual in charge of the executive branch, in charge of enforcing the laws. There is one person, one individual. That is a lot of power to give to one person. And so when you think about that, like, Brutus singles out the executive branch as something that's going to become a problem. Now, Hamilton here gets to be Hamilton. Hamilton, remember, he doesn't like the idea of federalism, or in a lot of ways, he wants a more active and vibrant government. And the Constitution's the best he's going to get. Now, Hamilton makes a very Hamiltonian argument here in Federalist 70, where he says the executive branch requires energy, okay? That enforcing the laws requires energy, that you cannot have an executive branch that does not have the energy to enforce the laws. And so while, Hamilton says here that while you can have checks and balances from outside, so you've got the judicial branch and the legislative branch to check the executive from the outside, Hamilton argues in Federalist 70, the reason why we have one person in charge of the executive without any checks, no executive committee or anything like that, that we need somebody, kind of like Harry Truman had that sign on his desk that said the buck stops here. There needs to be someone who is just in charge of that one branch of government. And again, this person doesn't have the authority to, just ignore the laws or anything like that. So we do want to make that note. So Federalist 70, unitary executive energy. Now, then there's Federalist 78, which is about the independent judiciary. Now, I kind of put that in quotes here because one of the things that was most offensive to the anti-federalist was that these judges are not elected. Okay, these judges are not elected. They're not directly accountable to people. Like, the least democratic branch of the government is the judiciary, that these people, like, in order to be a federal judge, you were nominated by the president, confirmed by the Senate. Now, of course, too, confirmed by the Senate, not confirmed by the House, which is the House of the people, but the Senate, which is really the lesser, the less democratic House, because it wasn't even directly elected at the time. So once somebody is, is nominated by the president, confirmed by the Senate, they're there on good behavior, which for all practical purposes for life, unless you take a bribe or consistently, or drunk on the bench or something like that, it takes a lot to be removed from the federal judiciary. So you're basically there as long as you don't royally screw up. Like even this situation with Justice Thomas, that he's taken gifts that were undeclared, that sort of thing. Not much chance that, there's going to be an impeachment process. First of all, because the Republicans control the House. And second of all, because, you don't have, enough Democrats in the Senate for the 2/3 vote. So it's very, very difficult. And then somebody might have to argue that, Justice Thomas has been influenced by some of these gifts. And if there's anybody who's been pretty much consistent throughout his tenure on the Supreme Court, it's been Clarence Thomas. So I think there would be a very difficult argument there. But again, it's very difficult to get rid of a judge. Now, Brutus number one. He said that, in Brutus number one, Brutus says that this federal judiciary is going to become so big, it's got the potential to swallow up the dignity of the state courts, that the state courts will mean nothing if we have a situation where the Constitution is ratified and the federal judiciary, takes effect. That he says the judiciary is going to be outsized and the state courts will mean nothing. Now, Federalist 78, I call this one Hamilton as con artist, because Hamilton, again, his objective is to get the biggest government possible, the most powerful government possible. So he answers Brutus's objections by saying that we need to have this unelected, the system of unelected judges. Let me see here. Let me show you this as well, because one thing that's very interesting as well is that in the states, the states have different, different ways of selecting their judges. Okay, and let me see what I can see here. Okay. So this is a, let's see, partisan. Yeah. So you've got. Let me share my screen in a second when I know that I've got something here. What is, let's see, the governor appoints a judge, sitting judges. Yeah. So you've got actually a lot of states that end up electing their judges. Okay. So as far as that goes, and really, I think there are very few states that not only don't elect their judges, but let them continue to serve. So basically, when you look at states like Missouri and Iowa, that the people don't put the judges on the bench, but they have elections now and then that the people can decide if that judge gets to continue in their place. And then you've got, these states in dark green where they have partisan elections, like somebody in Alabama or Louisiana or Texas or Illinois or Pennsylvania or Ohio. Like somebody runs for a judgeship in the state and they run as a member of a political party. So, and on one hand, somebody would say, well, that doesn't sound like an independent judiciary. But on the other hand, it's a judiciary that's responsive to the people. And so Brutus would like this system of electing judges, of having some sort of democratic process. Now, again, the anti-federalists are kind of suspect of even having a federal judiciary in the first place. Now, what Hamilton says in Federalist 78, Hamilton says, hello, JD. All right, we got JD in the crowdcast asking hello. So when we think about this, Hamilton says that we need these judges to not be elected, and we need them to serve on good behavior, aka for life, because this will make them less partial. Now, in theory, that sounds good, but let's do a little poll here for those of you in crowdcast. Do you believe, do you believe that our federal judges as a whole are not influenced by politics? Okay, so political concerns. Okay, so let's take a look at there. Yes, strongly. Yes, somewhat. Okay, and somewhat no. And then no. Strongly. Okay. So let's go ahead and make a little poll there. Those of you in the crowdcast, just to see what's going on here. Okay. So the federal judges as a whole are not influenced by political concerns. So Hamilton says that we need this in order to make sure that we have a truly independent judiciary. Okay. And so, with that, now the other thing, like basically not influenced by politics, and the other thing Hamilton said is Brutus says that this federal judiciary is just going to be all over the place at the forefront. So as far as that goes, that Brutus said, that Hamilton says the judiciary will be the least dangerous of the branches of government. Like, it's just, you're not even going to know it's there, basically. Now, that's certainly not what we see there. But yeah, we see here that, most of you tend to believe that, we see the most common are in the somewhats, but somewhat no, like, just thinking that, hey, I don't think necessarily that they are always thinking about politics, but certainly like a judge's political persuasion is going to have some kind of effect there. And so from there, we think, yeah, now this is something, Izzy, that, this is called judicial activism. Okay. Judicial activism is when a judge says that, hey, there's the Constitution, there's the law, but also I'm put here to give my own judgment. Okay. That is judicial activism, where the judge says that they believe that, look, I'm there partly to give my own kind of thing here. And so with that, so for example, I happen to have this book here that, Justice Stephen Breyer, who retired recently, wrote this book called Active Liberty. Okay. And he's basically defending to a degree judicial activism. Where it's just the judge needs to be present there somewhat. Now, you look on the other hand, I think that Justice Gorsuch would be probably one of the better examples of a judge that, he looks at the text of the law very strictly. So a couple of years ago, Justice Gorsuch wrote this opinion that infuriated conservatives, where he interpreted the 1964 Civil Rights Act to apply to people's, basically their sexuality and gender identity. Now, nobody would think that, okay, that's what the people who wrote this thing meant. But Justice Gorsuch said, let's look at the text. It says you cannot discriminate based on sex. And so Gorsuch's reasoning was, when the law says that that you cannot discriminate based on sex, if I were to show up for work, for example, if I were to show up for work wearing a dress and high heels and lipstick, and my principal were to tell me that, Richie, you've got to go home and change. You are not in dress code. And I would say, well, I mean, I am in dress code when you look at the guidelines here. And are you sending me home because I'm not in dress code? Or are you sending me home because I am not meeting your expectations for how a biological male should dress? And so Gorsuch says, his reasoning there was, according to the law, it says you cannot discriminate based on sex. And so if you are enforcing anything based on someone's sex, then that is contrary to the law. Now, that would be an example of somewhat, I think when it comes down to it, like, Gorsuch once in a while comes out with some kind of surprise. And, by and large, he tends to, conservatives tend to like him because conservatives, in most cases, they want a more restrained judiciary, not in all necessarily. Where is the hype? Somebody asked here. So as far as that goes, JD, I think I would rather 1 year as representative in the House, because I'd get more time, or maybe like 2 years if you're George Santos. He'd better enjoy that. He's living his best life for about 2 years. I don't think he's going back, even though he claims he's running for re-election. So as far as that goes. that we also want to think about the letter from Birmingham Jail, which is the only one of these foundational documents not to be from the founding period. And this is where Dr. King wrote the letter from Birmingham Jail after he'd gotten arrested in Birmingham, Alabama. And, you know, he was leading acts of civil disobedience, that Dr. King was a big advocate of nonviolence and civil disobedience. And so there were some, you know, some people, some white liberals who wrote, you know, an open letter to Dr. King and said, Dr. King, you know, could you just be a little more patient? Could you just try to let us use the, you know, the legal processes and try to get some of these laws changed? Do you really need to come down to Birmingham and shake things up so much and stir up so much trouble? That this is not how, you know, things work, especially in the South. But Dr. King says, look, these laws are unjust. And therefore, if a law goes against principles of justice, then someone has an obligation. It's not just they have the option, but they have an obligation to break an unjust law. And of course, this is something, the letter from Birmingham Jail reveals this kind of tension that exists between, on one side in the United States, we value what's called the rule of law. And so the rule of law says that here's the law, and people generally follow the law. Okay. So that's something that, you know, here's the law and people generally follow it. That is what we're thinking of in terms of the rule of law. But Dr. King, in the letter from Birmingham Jail, he notes that, you know, and this kind of comes back full circle when you think about the Declaration of Independence, because the Declaration of Independence says that, you know, when you think about the Declaration of Independence, it says that when a government has become a tyranny, that government is no longer legitimate, and the people have a right to alter or abolish it and create a new social contract. But as far as this goes, Dr. King is arguing that a citizen has a moral obligation to break an unjust law even within the social contract. Okay, so that's what's, you know, so when you think about the Declaration of Independence as changing, you know, making a new social contract when the other one's not working, Dr. King is saying that someone should, you know, perform acts of civil disobedience within the social contract. So as far as that goes, I think that, you know, we see here, Izzy, we've kind of been through those 4 Federalist papers. Now, again, Federalist 10, that is, large republics are better than small republics because they limit the influence of faction. Now, remember, that is responding to Brutus number 1, where Brutus says that you can only have republicanism in a small republic where representatives know each other's minds. Federalist 51, that is the checks and balances. That is saying that, okay, Brutus, we agree with you that there are going to be people who are disreputable and dishonorable who get involved in the government. But we've created this thing. Remember, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, we would not need to keep the government, you know, we would not need any kind of internal checks on government. Now, another very important quote from Federalist 51 is not Federalists, but power must be restrained. Power can only be restrained by power. Okay. So power can only be restrained by power. And basically that, you know, what we have here is we know, given Enlightenment views of human nature and human selfishness, we know that people are going to be going for their own thing. That's why we've set it up this way. And remember, there is a fail-safe that even if all 3 branches of the federal government, both houses of Congress, the presidency, the Supreme Court, are all on the same page, at the end of the day, you've also got the states. All right. What unit do I need to know most for the exam? Okay, now as far as what the course and exam description says, that, let's see, AP US Government course and exam description. The main thing, like as far as this goes, that the biggest part of the course is going to be that part that goes over the institutions of American government, the legislative, the legislative, executive, and judicial, and how these branches interact with each other. So as far as that goes, you can actually see this in the course and exam description. Let me just go ahead and bring y'all to take a quick look here, okay? So as far as that goes, we see here that foundations of American democracy, 15 to 22%. Now that's where we go into the ideals of democracy, the different types of democracy, the elite theory, the participatory theory, and of course the pluralist theory. Individual rights, the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution, the principles of government, basic federalism, okay? And then that's going to be 15 to 22%. Now, between a fourth and a third of the test, or over a third, so probably around a third of the test is going to be the interactions among the branches. This is the heavy hitter, okay? So this is going to be the heavy hitter. Congress, congressional behavior, the powers of the president, check on the presidency, expansion of presidential power, the judicial branch. So the three branches of government, and of course the bureaucracy, which kind of sometimes is something of a fourth branch of government. And then we see here civil liberties and civil rights, 13 to 18%, American political ideologies and beliefs, about 10 to 15, and then another heavy hitter here, political participation. So the first three units are the government part of the course, and units 4 and 5 are the politics part. So you've got really here unit 2, followed by unit 5, followed by unit 1, and then you have here, unit 3 and unit 4. So that's going to be the hierarchy there. So thank you very much for your question. Now, should we memorize all the amendments? No, memorize the amendments that are most relevant, okay? So as far as that goes, I would think in terms of the Bill of Rights, a lot of the Bill of Rights, I would say the first, the second, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, then the Eighth Amendment, and then of course the Ninth and the 10th Amendment are pretty easy to remember as well. Then the Reconstruction Amendments, you probably remember those from U.S. history, 13, 14, 15. And as far as that goes, I think that, there's going to be limited value in trying to just memorize all the amendments just for the sake of memorizing them. I would say make sure that you know that, kind of the spirit of these amendments. You certainly don't have to know all of the every last one of these things, just, oh, that's in the 22nd Amendment or something like that. So as far as that goes, could you go over how we're supposed to use these documents in the argument essay? Izzy, that is going to be something I think for another time. Now, I've got a couple of broadcasts here that we're going to be doing, over the, so basically Sunday night, I'm going to be broadcasting on my channel at 8 p.m. Eastern. So you go to my YouTube channel, or Izzy, if you're signed up here for Crowdcast, more than likely I'm going to be broadcasting here on Crowdcast. Okay, so if you're here, this is going to be at 8 p.m. on Sunday evening. And then I'm planning to go to Marco Learning's channel for 9 o'clock. Okay, so we're going to go from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock. So I would say that writing and, going over how to use documents in an argument essay, I'm going to get around to that during those, one of those two broadcasts on the night before the AP government exam. So just understand that that's coming. But again, I'm going to be on my channel at 8. And then I'm going to be going, on the Marco Learning's channel at 9. Now, as far as that, somebody's asking for a master doc sort of thing that we can use to study. I would say that that's already in the course and exam description. That basically maps out the whole course. Then, of course, you've got, your foundational documents listed, your Supreme Court cases listed, and all of that kind of stuff there. So with that, it has been a pleasure tonight. Hopefully y'all feel like y'all have gotten a good review of the foundational documents, and you feel a little bit, a little bit better on that. So yes, thank you for coming out, Vicky, and Mr. Richey. Can I get a quick shout out saying that B1 cis is better than B3? Okay, I have no idea what that means, but there we go. And so let's see here, Among Us enthusiasts, that's great. Yeah, so with that, we've got great things. What should I recommend to him to cram? Yeah, I think that as far as that goes, the exam really should be something that is a reward for having been pretty diligent for the most part. Okay, so as far as that goes, wow, what a comment section. All right, so with that, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. Before I am pressured toward indecency or something like that. So before this chat degenerates, we're going to go ahead and call it a night. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, it is always a pleasure, and thank you very much for supporting my work and being here. And again, I will be on my channel at 8 p.m. Eastern on Sunday night. Looking forward to seeing that. All right, glad to save your brains, ladies and gentlemen. Always a pleasure.